America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before.
Recently, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, gave a striking address to European leaders on the importance of Western civilization, arguing that our shared culture and Christian foundations are not relics of the past, but something worth preserving and even fighting for. Let's watch a portion of that speech, and then we will hear Bishop Barron's reaction and why he found that significant.
America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before. The men who settled and built the nation of my birth arrived on our shores carrying the memories and the traditions and the Christian faith of their ancestors as a sacred inheritance, an unbreakable link between the old world and the new. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive, because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. It was here in Europe where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here in Europe where which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic.
What Rubio is pointing to is not nostalgia or sentimentality, but historical reality. Europe and its cultural heir, America, were not simply influenced by Christianity, they were shaped by it. Christianity was not a decorative layer added onto Western society. It stood at its core, providing the moral vision and intellectual foundation that formed its institutions. The rule of law, grounded in higher moral order, the belief that every person bears the image of God, and the rise of universities from cathedral schools, the founding of hospitals through Christian charity, and legal systems built upon accountability before a transcendent authority. These were not random outcomes of geography or economics. They emerged from a distinctly Christian understanding of the human person and of reality itself. And especially for me, this is not an abstract theory or a conclusion drawn merely from books and documentaries. It comes from lived experience. Having grown up in India within a very different civilizational and religious framework and then moving to Australia, I can say from first-hand experience that the visible order, the respect for equality before the law, the emphasis on human dignity, and the sense of beauty in public places, and the protection of individual freedom are clearly noticeable. Probably that is the reason why so many Western countries are first world nations, while India is still considered a third world country. That does not mean Western nations are perfect. They clearly are not. But it is not intellectually honest to claim that culture plays no role in the relative stability, institutional integrity, and social development we see in many Western societies today. Even Richard Dawkins, one of today's most outspoken atheists, has called himself a cultural Christian, admitting that though he rejects belief in God, he prefers to live in a society shaped by Christian culture. Proof that one may reject the faith, but not easily the civilization it built. Now, Bishop Barron explains why that foundation matters and what happens if it is abandoned. Let's listen.
His point was, we got to get beyond just our political differences and find our sources in the great culture that unites us. And then he took a further step that was very much in line with Pope Benedict XVI and Christopher Dawson, namely that culture is grounded in cult. At the root of all culture is something like religion. And so he wasn't afraid to reference the Christian faith as a key element in giving rise to the shared culture of Europe and America. So a really good speech, I thought. Well, then just, I think it was yesterday, I saw Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez answering him. And I was very struck by her answer. I thought it was very illuminating. She said, this appeal to culture, it's so thin because culture is ephemeral, it's always changing. And so we shouldn't pay attention to culture, we just pay attention to the material foundations in the class struggle. Well, all of that, everybody, is right out of the Marxist playbook. First of all, that Western culture, as Rubio invoked it, is thin. The culture that gave us all those great figures, that gave us the rule of law, that gave us respect for the rights of the individual, that gave us our democratic political system, that gave us the university system, that's thin. And your argument is, well, because cultures always change. Well, that's a banality. I mean, of course, cultures are alive, they change and evolve. Doesn't mean for a second we can't identify the key elements within a culture that gives it its character. But also this, to characterize culture as thin is a Marxist move. Marx said that culture is simply an epiphenomenal superstructure on top of the economic substructure. And don't be distracted, therefore, by the culture. That's just protecting the economics at bottom. Well, again, listen to her. Let's pay attention to the material conditions and to class struggle. Again, that's the Marxist playbook. What's worrying me, everybody, is the extent to which political leadership on the left in America is becoming unapologetically Marxist. The mayor of New York City, the warmth of collectivism. He's calling for the confiscation of private property, of seizing the means of production. All language right out of the Communist Manifesto. Might I encourage followers of, Mayor Mamdani and AOC, talk to some of them, they're still alive, some of them, the people that fled Marxist tyranny in Europe, people laboring under it to this day in Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, etc. And then this too. It concerns me not just as someone who follows politics, but as a bishop of the Catholic Church. Marx himself said the first critique is a critique of religion, and his political adepts followed him. The first thing that the Marxist tyrannies went after in most cases was religion. I'm getting a little concerned that in some of these leading figures in our own politics, a Marxist philosophy is taking hold. As a religious leader, this is concerning me quite a bit. Take a look, everybody. Attend to the language. In a way, they're telling us who they are and what they're for. And I think that should be very concerning to everybody. God bless you.
As you just heard, Bishop Barron had high praise for Rubio's speech because Rubio spoke so clearly and unapologetically about the shared Christian culture that shaped both America and Europe. But the most important point for us to understand is what Bishop Barron says about the Marxist framework that has quietly influenced so much modern political thinking. According to classic Marxist theory, going all the way back to Karl Marx himself, culture is not the engine of civilization, economics is. Marx argued that what truly drives culture is class struggle, that material conditions and economic structures form the base of society, and that religion, morality, law, and art are merely part of the superstructure that sits upon these economic realities. In that framework, culture does not shape prosperity, prosperity shapes culture. Religion, in Marx's famous phrase, becomes the opium of the people, a product of material struggle rather than a formative force in its own right. And what Rubio and Bishop Barron are pushing back against is precisely that reduction. The idea that you can explain the success or failure of nations purely through economics and class conflict while treating culture, religion, and moral vision as secondary or irrelevant. That is why the attempt to reduce everything to class struggle fails to account for the civilizational depth of what Christianity produced. As St. Pope John Paul II said, a nation's culture is not an epiphenomenon of its own economic structures, but the suppression of its deepest spiritual convictions. I hope this video is helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.